17 листопада працюємо.
It's November 17. Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform starts its operation. My name is Svetlana Chaparenko. Now we will be talking about the financial stability of the country and its citizens. And joining us online is Olena Korobkova, the chair of the board of the Independent Association of the Banks of Ukraine. Good afternoon, Ms. Olena. Good afternoon. So let's start our conversation with the level of inflation and the salaries. So how do we end this year and what should we expect the next year? Thank you for your question. Today the inflation reached the minimum of 5.3%. In October 23, the index of consumer prices grew only 0.8%. However, comparing it with the year 22, the same indicator was almost twice as high, so the inflation slowed down significantly. However, according to the evaluations of the analysts, there is another issue. According to their forecasts, it's quite probable that the slowdown of inflation is already over. This is why the next year we expect the indicator of inflation to approximate 6%. Talking about the wages, according to the State Statistics Service of Ukraine, within the second quarter of year 23, the average salary was at the level of 17,176 hryvnia, which is 25% more than within the same period of the previous year. So the nominal salary has grown 25%. However, in real figures, it's 9% lower than the pre-war time level. So talking in simple words, the real salary with the count of inflation grew 9%. However, it was 9% less within the last 2 years. And according to the approved budget for the next year, after 2 increases, the minimal salary will be increased up to 8,000 hryvnia next year. However, according to the evaluations of the government, the average salary will be at the level of 22,000 hryvnias. So basically, the real salary will be growing 8.5% with the count of current inflation. The same will happen to the pensions. In the January 24, the pensions will be increased up to 2,361 hryvnia at the minimum. Also, the maximum pension will be increased up to 23,600 hryvnias. On top of that, there will be premiums for every additional year in amount of 23 hryvnia 61 kopecks. In January next year, those Ukrainians will have their pensions increased who comply the track record requirements. 35 years for the men and 30 years for the women who achieved the age of 65 years. Also in January 24, the minimum pension will be increased up to 2,842 hryvnias. So talking about inflation, what was the cause for it to slow down? Well, there's a number of factors for the inflation to slow down, and it's the responsibility of the National Bank to slow down or speed up the inflation. And all those actions taken by the National Bank of Ukraine were the ones that influenced the inflation pace. What's also necessary is the help of international investors, foreign investors. So the multitude of those factors and the fact that first there was a factor of unpredictability, but now the financial system has completely adopted adapted to the current conditions, and all those measures taken by the government, they make positive influence on economy, including the slowdown of inflation. Talking about the currency exchange rate, we see that within the latest period it's been quite stable. So what are the factors that will influence the currency exchange rate next year, and what should we expect next year? Well, the main factors that influence the currency exchange rate is that the National Bank of Ukraine is gradually switching to the flexible rate, and the last changes in monetary policy resulted in the currency exchange rate to fall down a little bit. I would not expect any significant fluctuations by the end of this year, just like the majority of analysts do, but what's important is the balance on the market, demand and supply. What's also important is the aid from foreign investors, foreign donors. However, under such conditions of unpredictability, sometimes it's difficult to decide when we talk about, for example, the savings for the regular citizens, so they don't depreciate. So what we have doesn't depreciate, so we can preserve it in a safe haven, so to say. The alternative may be not only the government bonds and deposits, but also the foreign currencies. So once again, I don't expect any serious fluctuations by the next of the year. So now that we've touched upon the topic of savings, well, on top of donations to armed forces of Ukraine as the best investment, what is the best way to save the money? Is it deposit? Is it just a current account? Is it the cash under your mattress or government bonds? What's your opinion? Well, if we check all of the options, in my opinion, government bonds is the least risky way of saving with the best yields. And talking about military government bonds denominated in hryvnia is just the same thing as you donate to armed forces of Ukraine, but at the same time you save your assets. So basically saying, if we check out the government bonds, the rate on the government bond is, the military bonds are 16 to 18% per annum, and sometimes they are bigger than the deposit rate in the banks of Ukraine. And the advantage of them is that the income on those bonds is not taxable, unlike the income on bank deposits. So comparing it to the bank deposits, some misadvantage may be that this instrument has a restriction in terms of access to your funds, because the maturity of the bonds may be at around 9 months. However, some of the banks now offer such a service to their customers as quick bailout of the government bonds, so that the citizens are not forced to wait for 9 months, but to sell them to they can sell them to the bank in after 6 or 3 months, in case they need to withdraw their money in a prompt manner, which provides additional space or room for maneuver. And all those money invested in military bonds, they are channeled to reinforce our defense capabilities. So basically we lend money to our defense sector, to our victory. And in case of bank deposits, the global trend, it's not only inherent in Ukraine, is the slowdown of inflation, which results in deposit rates going down, including in the hryvnia. And currently banking system demonstrated the high level of resilience and reliability, regardless the objective obstacles. after the beginning of the war, the law was adopted on 100% guarantee of all the bank deposits. It was the initiative of the president. And now all over the bank, not only in a shut bank as it used to be before, but all over the banks, all over the banking system, they prepare 100% provisions against deposits. Also, if we consider an option of investments in real estate, that's quite a complicated way of investments during the war. Now there is additional factor of unpredictability added here, and because the traditional advantages are added with a misadvantage of destruction of property. Also unfavorable demographic tendencies which resulted from the invasion of Russian Federation have even jeopardized the situation, and it may all add restrictions to the dynamic of prices in the long-term perspective. Considering an option of deposits with foreign banks, it's been a long time ago that the deposit rates are very low there, and in Ukrainian banking system traditionally the deposit rates are higher. Well, if we consider options of bank deposits, what are the criteria that Ukrainians should consider to trust their savings to the banks? Well, now it's more than 60 banks operating in Ukraine. They all are part of Federation of Savings Guarantee, and they all are licensed banks. So basically the Ukrainians really should consider other options, such as availability of bank branches and ATMs near their place of residence. What is the range of additional products offered by the banks to their individual customers? And it's very convenient when in one mobile application you have option of currency exchange, making a deposit, paying for utility service, taking a credit, or replenishing your mobile phone account. So a lot of banks have developed wonderful mobile applications, which was unlikely supported by COVID. And this digitalization that we're talking about is happening in the banking sector the quickest possible. They've adapted all of their mobile applications to the modern conditions, so only based on the individual requirements of the citizens they should pick their banks, because there are banks with foreign capital, banks with Ukrainian capital, there are state-owned banks, there are banks which participate in 579 program for business, there are banks which are a part of the program e-residence. So basically it all depends on the requirements and needs of a customer. The bank system in whole is resilient and reliable, and what they demonstrate within the last 2 years in Ukraine, this situation is going to end up in history books about how cool was the banking system of Ukraine during the war. Well, and talking about lending, what is the dynamics of demand on part of the population, and what are the current lending rates? Well, you know, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia has broken the tendency of growth of NPL. that was in effect since year 2017. For the time being, the level of NPLs has decreased almost 300 billion, and the part in portfolios decreased from 55 to 27% as of the 1st of September 2022. However, as of the 1st of October 23, this part with this fraction already amounted to 37% of credit portfolios of the banks. And if we analyze it, that growth resulted from loans extended before the war. So basically under conditions when the borrowers did not expect to lose income, to lose property, to lose collaterals, and now the banks emphasize that the rate of NPLs among the credits extended during the war is pretty low, so banks are now way more thorough and meticulous while extending their loans. They check where the collateral is located, how the principal and the interest will be paid on that loan, and thus the borrowers are supposed to provide more realistic certificates to the bank, more detailed information about where they are going to get the funds for repayment of the loans. On the 7th of September, the Ukrainian banks were supposed to reinforce compliance on Ukrainian payment cards. So what is the situation there? What are the operations that are being deemed as suspicious by the banks? Well, it's all in process of testing for the time being. The program of compliance reinforcement contemplates that the customer are supposed to provide the banks with a forecast of monthly spending, like whether it will be one-off activity or will it be regular. It will be identified further on by the banks, so the banks understand better what's going on. And I wanted to get back to the lending, and I just wanted to give a good example of lending. I wanted to emphasize that the state program are a good example of such lending. They help a lot. They support the development of economy. One of such examples is 579 that was first envisaged as stimulation of lending to the borrowers affected and businesses affected by the war, but now it turned into an anti-crisis program. And if we check the statistics as of as of November this year, there were more than 40,000 agreements entered into, loan agreements with a total amount of 160 billion hryvnia. And if we analyze the structure of the borrowers in terms of state sector, I mean the state-owned banks, government-controlled banks, more than 30,000 agreements were accounted to state-controlled banks with a total amount of almost 130 billion hryvnia that were issued to the agricultural sector mostly. Then next are the lending for the investment purposes and a minor fraction for refinancing of previously acquired loans. Also have improved itself as quite advantageous was the e-residence program. The funds in amount of 7 billion hryvnias were lended to Ukrainian families. The majority of those loans were obtained by the representatives of the military and law enforcement. 12% account for the teachers and 9% for the representatives of the medical sector. All those programs are going to continue for the next year. Thank you very much, Ms. Natalia. Dear journalists, do we have any questions on the floor? Vladislav Obuch, Ukrinform. What are the steps of the regulator that the bank community expects by the end of this year and in the beginning of the next year in terms of liberalization of monetary policy? And what is your forecast regarding the December decision of National Bank of Ukraine regarding the discount rate? And what are the prospects of additional of legislation on additional taxation of the banking sector? Well, thank you for the question. Let me start from the end, probably. Yes, really, yesterday the committee has recommended to impose the additional tax on additional profits, and for what I know, next week this draft law will be voted in the parliament. And the banks, they are really socially responsible. They understand that they're supposed to help. And what was the consensus is that the banks were agreeing to taxation for the years 36% instead of 18, but what was approved yesterday, it will be 50% for year 23 and 25% for the rest of the years. It's not quite a pleasant piece of news because retrospective taxation is not something we'd like to see. The banks pay the taxes on a quarterly basis, and there will be a mechanism devised to pay those retrospective taxes, but it may result in non-positive consequences for the banking system because, first of all, it's about trust by the investors. When the taxation basis is being changed in the end of the year, it may be an unexpected move and not a very favorable trend. But we hope it will be a one-off activity that will not be repeated in the history of the banking system of Ukraine. What did the banks expect? In the year 2024, there is certain indefinition in terms of taxation. What will be the taxation structure in the next year? But we as a banks expect the evaluation of financial stability, and there is no single bank in Ukraine that is unaffected by the war. Every bank starts its day with the news from the front, specifically in the cases of intense attacks of Russia on Ukraine, in case of any destruction which resulted from shelling. Right away the banks evaluate the losses and damage. So it's basically the main factor. We understand everybody is working on bringing the victory together, and we hope the next year will be victorious, and the banking sector does everything possible, takes all necessary efforts to make it happen. Thank you very much, Ms. Olena, for your comprehensive answers. We were talking about financial stability and the welfare of citizens, and At 13 o'clock we will talk about reinforcing of our power grid and making it stronger. Stay tuned.